She didn't resist when they handcuffed her at the shooting range. No badge, no explanation needed. Just a quiet woman hitting impossible targets who refused to identify herself. The small-town courtroom prepared for a routine arraignment until heavy doors swung open. A Navy admiral in full-dress uniform walked silently down the center aisle. Military veterans stood at attention. The judge's face drained of color as she read the sealed documents. And suddenly, everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for recognition they deserve. Dawn breaks over a remote civilian shooting range in coastal Maine. Fog clings to targets as shooters begin to arrive. Among them is a woman in her mid-30s, unremarkable in every visible way. She wears faded jeans, a plain gray jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing about her draws attention as she walks quietly to the farthest lane, carrying a long case that could hold anything from a specialty camera to music equipment. Frank Holden, the range safety officer, sips his morning coffee and watches through the glass of his small booth. 22 years in the Navy, followed by a decade running this range, had given him an eye for people. Most shooters he could categorize: immediately hunters sighting in rifles for the season, competitive shooters with their specialized gear, weekend warriors playing tactical games, and the occasional law enforcement getting some practice in. This woman didn't. Dawn breaks over a remote civilian shooting range in coastal Maine. Fog clings to targets as shooters begin to arrive. Among them is a woman in her mid-30s, remarkable in every visible way. She wears faded jeans, a plain gray jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing about her draws attention. She sets up at the farthest lane, methodically assembling her rifle with practiced movements that suggest years of experience. The range safety officer, a retired police officer named Frank, watches from his booth as she begins her session. Her first shots hit center mass with uncanny precision. Then, without adjusting her scope, she switches to targets at increasingly impossible distances. Frank notices her breathing technique: the controlled 4-count inhale, the steady hold, the relaxed exhale as she pulls the trigger. Most telling is how she adjusts for wind without equipment, sensing changes that even seasoned hunters would miss. A nervous patron approaches Frank. "That woman at the end, something's not right. She's hitting targets that shouldn't be possible with that setup. And she's got no ID badge." 20 minutes later, 2 local police officers arrive. They approach cautiously, hands near holsters. "Ma'am, we need to see some identification and your permit for that weapon," the senior officer says. The woman turns calmly, hands visible. "Is there a problem, officer?" "ID and permit, please." Her face betrays nothing as she replies, "I don't have those with me." A search reveals no wallet, no phone, just a keycard with no identifying marks, and a small notebook with what appears to be coordinates. "You're going to need to come with us, ma'am." She doesn't resist when they handcuff her. No protest, no explanation, just quiet compliance that somehow unnerves the officers more than resistance would have. As they escort her to the police cruiser, Frank notices something striking her eyes continuously scan the tree line, the road, the mountain range in the distance, as if she's calculating something only she can see. The sheriff's office in Coastal Harbor is small: 3 holding cells, a booking area, and offices for the sheriff and 2 detectives. The woman sits silently during processing, offering no resistance to fingerprinting but providing no information. "Name?" asks the booking officer. Silence. "Address?" Nothing. "You understand refusing to identify yourself is a crime, right?" She meets his gaze with calm, steady eyes but says nothing. Detective Marcus Wells takes over, attempting various interrogation techniques: friendly conversation, implied threats about federal charges, mentions of cooperation benefits. She responds with respectful silence to each approach. "Got ourselves a real mystery woman," jokes a deputy. "Maybe she's a Russian spy." Others laugh. When left alone in her cell, subtle changes appear in her demeanor. She examines the room with measured precision, noting camera positions, identifying blind spots, timing guard rotations. Through her cell window, she carefully studies the building layout, marking emergency exits and security protocols. Prints came back empty, Wells tells the sheriff. Nothing in local or state databases. Try federal, the sheriff suggests. System's down. Text says we can try again tomorrow. A rookie officer brings her water. As she accepts the cup, her sleeve rides up slightly, revealing a small, distinctive scar on her wrist, the kind of mark left by specialized training exercises involving rope descents from helicopters. That's an interesting scar, the officer comments. Rock climbing accident, she replies, her first words in hours. The public defender arrives late afternoon harried, overworked, annoyed. You're making this much harder than it needs to be, he tells her after 20 minutes of getting nowhere. They're talking about terrorist threats now. The weapon you had isn't registered anywhere. As they prepare her for arraignment the next morning, Wells notices something odd. Despite facing serious charges, despite the orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, she carries herself with unshakable calm. Not the defiance of a career criminal or the fear of someone in trouble, but the patience of someone who knows something everyone else doesn't. As deputies escort her to the courthouse van, she briefly glances toward the harbor where a naval vessel can be seen in the distance. For just a moment, the smallest change crosses her expression. The Coastal Harbor Courthouse dates back to 1887, its wooden benches and ornate railings speaking to a simpler time. Today, it's packed beyond capacity-curious locals, reporters from Portland papers, and unusually several men in dark suits positioned strategically around the room. Judge Eleanor Harmon looks irritated as she reviews the docket. At the defendant's table, the woman sits quietly next to her frustrated public defender. Your Honor, I'd like to request a continuance, the defender says. My client has been uncooperative, and I haven't been able to prepare adequately. From the gallery, a man in a suit stands. Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Thomas from Homeland Security. We're requesting immediate transfer of the defendant to federal custody pending investigation of potential threats to national security. Before the judge can respond, another voice joins in. The FBI has jurisdiction here, Your Honor. A different suited man approaches. We have reason to believe this relates to an ongoing investigation. The judge bangs her gavel. Enough. This is still my courtroom. We will proceed with arraignment, and then I will consider jurisdictional arguments. The clerk reads charges. Possession of unregistered firearms, refusal to identify to law enforcement, potential terrorist activity. The defendant remains impassive, eyes focused forward, posture perfect. Detective Wells, seated in the front row, studies her with growing curiosity. Something about her doesn't fit any profile he knows not. Terrorist, not criminal, not mentally ill. How does the defendant plead? Judge Harmon asks. Before the public defender can answer, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swing open. Every head turns as a Navy Admiral in full-dress uniform walks in, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Two officers flank him, equally formal in their appearance. The gallery falls silent. Without announcement or permission, the Admiral walks directly down the center aisle. Military veterans throughout the room instinctively stand at attention. Even the judge straightens her posture. The Admiral approaches the bench and hands a sealed document to the bailiff, who delivers it to Judge Harmon. As she breaks the seal and reads, her expression shifts from annoyance to surprise to grave understanding. After a long moment, she looks up. In light of this documentation from the Department of Defense, all charges against the defendant are dismissed effective immediately. This case is classified as a matter of national security. She bangs her gavel with finality. Court is adjourned. The room erupts in confused murmurs as the Admiral approaches the defendant. The bailiff quickly removes her handcuffs. For the first time, the woman speaks clearly, her voice carrying authority despite its softness. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. The Admiral's response silences the room. On the contrary, Commander, the Navy apologizes to you. At the word Commander, every military person present, including two bailiffs, several observers, and even Agent Thomas, snap to perfect attention in obvious respect. Detective Wells watches in amazement as the woman's entire demeanor transforms. No longer attempting to be invisible, she stands tall, shoulders squared, the deliberate military bearing now unmistakable. Without the intentional posture of ordinariness, she suddenly commands the room just as powerfully as the Admiral. Judge Harmon, herself, a former JAG officer, now stands and offers a respectful nod to both the Admiral and the woman. "Thank you for your understanding, Your Honor," the Admiral says. "Commander Hayes has been operating under classified orders. The situation required discretion." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamor for information, as the woman, now changed into civilian clothes provided by the Navy officers, stands beside the Admiral near a black government SUV. Sheriff Daniels approaches them, confusion and respect battling on his face. "Admiral, with all due respect, my department deserves some explanation. We've been treating this as a potential terrorist threat." "Sheriff, I understand your concern," the Admiral replies. "Commander Hayes is one of our most decorated special operators. The details of her assignment remain classified, but I can assure you she poses no threat to your community. Quite the opposite." Detective Wells steps forward. "Commander, I owe you an apology." She meets his eyes directly now, no longer hiding behind careful blankness. "No apology necessary, Detective. You were doing your job." An elderly man in a VFW cap approaches cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am. I was a corpsman with the Marines in Desert Storm. Been sitting in that courthouse all morning. I knew there was something familiar about the way you carried yourself." He extends his hand. "Thank you for your service, whatever it is you do." The woman shakes his hand firmly. "Thank you for yours." The Admiral checks his watch. "Commander Hayes, we should proceed. Operation Silent Harbor requires debriefing, and Washington is waiting for your report." Sheriff Daniels' eyes widen. "Silent Harbor? The counterterrorism operation that prevented the port attack last year?" The Admiral remains professionally vague. "Commander Hayes has given 12 years of exemplary service to this country. Much of it will never be known to the public." A reporter pushes forward. "Commander, will you make a statement?" "No comment," she replies firmly, "and I'd appreciate privacy." As they move toward the waiting vehicle, something remarkable happens. The law enforcement officers present, including those who had arrested and detained her, form an impromptu honor corridor. The military personnel among them salute as she passes. Detective Wells watches, finally understanding what had seemed so odd about her from the beginning. She wasn't trying to hide guilt. She was trained to hide excellence. Sunset casts long shadows across the now empty shooting range. Frank, the range safety officer, checks the last lanes before closing. A government vehicle pulls up, and Commander Hayes steps out. Her demeanor is subtly different now. Without needing to hide her capabilities, she moves with the fluid efficiency of someone at the absolute peak of physical training. "I've come for my equipment," she explains. Frank nods. "Sheriff had it sent back this afternoon. Special courier." He retrieves a secured case from the office. As she checks the contents, Frank clears his throat. 20 years Navy, myself. Submarines. Nothing fancy like what you must do, but I thought there was something about you." She smiles slightly. "Most people see what they expect to see. That rifle, it's not standard issue for anyone I know." "No," she agrees. "It's not." She takes it out, assembles it with practiced ease, and approaches the farthest lane. Without a scope, she takes aim at a target barely visible in the fading light and impossible shot by any standard. The rifle barely makes a sound. Through binoculars, Frank confirms a perfect bullseye. She disassembles the rifle and packs it carefully. "I appreciate your discretion earlier. You could have intervened before the police arrived." "Wasn't my place," Frank says. "But I did call someone after they took you in. Old Navy buddy who works at the Pentagon now." She pauses, then nods with understanding. "Thank you." "Will you come back?" he asks as she returns to her vehicle. Commander Hayes looks out toward the harbor, where naval operations continue unseen by most civilians. "Some of us are always around," she says quietly. "You just don't see us." As she drives away, Frank renders a perfect salute to the disappearing taillights. 2 weeks later, Detective Wells sits at his desk, reviewing case files when his phone rings. "Detective Wells," he answers. "Detective, this is Admiral Wilson. We met briefly during the incident with Commander Hayes." Wells sits up straighter. Yes, sir. What can I do for you? I'm calling to extend an invitation. Commander Hayes is receiving a commendation tomorrow at Naval Station Norfolk. Given your involvement in the situation, she thought you might want to attend. Wells is surprised. I'd be honored, sir, but I'm confused. I arrested her. Sometimes the people who challenge us most end up teaching us the most valuable lessons, the Admiral says. The ceremony is classified, but we can arrange clearance. The next morning, Wells drives to Norfolk, passing through multiple security checkpoints before being escorted to a small auditorium. The audience consists of fewer than 50 people, mostly high-ranking officers and personnel in civilian clothing who carry themselves with unmistakable military bearing. Wells takes a seat in the back row. The ceremony begins without fanfare, no press, no photographers. Admiral Wilson approaches the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, today we recognize Commander Alexandra Hayes for extraordinary service during Operation Silent Harbor. For security reasons, I can only say that Commander Hayes spent 11 months undercover, identifying and neutralizing a critical threat to our national security. Wells watches as Commander Hayes steps forward. In her formal Navy uniform adorned with ribbons and commendations, she bears little resemblance to the unremarkable woman he arrested at the shooting range. The Admiral continues, Commander Hayes established herself as one of our foremost experts in counterterrorism and unconventional warfare after graduating first in her class at Coronado. She became one of the first female operators to qualify for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, though this fact remains classified. Wells leans forward, beginning to understand the magnitude of the person he had handcuffed and processed as a potential threat. During Operation Silent Harbor, Commander Hayes eliminated 16 confirmed threats while maintaining deep cover. Her actions directly prevented a coordinated attack on 3 eastern seaboard ports that would have resulted in catastrophic loss of life. The Admiral looks directly at Commander Hayes. When your position was potentially compromised, you maintained operational security, despite personal risk, even when doing so resulted in your detention by local authorities. Wells feels a flush of embarrassment, but he notices Commander Hayes nodding respectfully toward him. There is no anger or resentment in her expression. After the ceremony, Wells approaches her cautiously. Commander Hayes, congratulations on your commendation. Thank you for coming, Detective, she says, extending her hand. I want to apologize again for what happened. No need. You were doing exactly what you should have done given the information you had, she replies. In fact, your thoroughness was impressive. Most would have been satisfied with a simple warning about range regulations. Wells shifts uncomfortably. If you don't mind me asking, why was it necessary to be detained? Surely you could have identified yourself to us privately. Commander Hayes glances around, then leads him to a quieter corner of the room. The operation wasn't complete. My cover identity needed to remain intact even under scrutiny. The individuals we were tracking had contacts throughout local government and law enforcement along the coast. If word got out that I'd received special treatment or identified myself as military, 11 months of work would have been compromised. So you just let us arrest you? Sometimes the best way to maintain cover is to commit fully to it, even when it's inconvenient, she says with the ghost of a smile. Besides, I knew the Admiral would intervene before things went too far. Another officer approaches, signaling that she's needed elsewhere. It was good to see you, Detective, she says. Keep up the good work. As she walks away, Admiral Wilson appears beside Wells. Impressive woman, isn't she? The Admiral says. Yes, sir. I've never met anyone like her. Few have. The Admiral pauses. You know, Detective, we're always looking for people with your attention to detail and persistence. If you ever consider a change of career, call my office. 6 months later, Wells stands on the deck of a naval vessel, watching the coast of Maine disappear into the distance. After 13 years with the Coastal Harbor Police Department, he had accepted a position with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. His first assignment, liaison between local law enforcement and naval special operations along the eastern seaboard. His phone buzzes with a text message from an unlisted number. Some of us are always around. Welcome aboard. Wells smiles, recognizing Commander Hayes' words from the shooting range. He knows he'll probably never see her again. People like her operate in shadows. Their successes never celebrated publicly, their sacrifices rarely acknowledged. But now he'll be part of the system that supports them, that makes their work possible. He'll help ensure that the next time someone like Commander Hayes needs to maintain cover, there will be protocols in place to protect both the operation and the local authorities doing their jobs. The captain approaches. Detective Wells, we're receiving reports of unusual activity at a private shooting range near our next port. Thought you might want to take point on this one. Wells nods, understanding that his new role is beginning. Yes, sir. I'll look into it right away. As he reviews the preliminary report, he notices a detail that makes him smile: a woman with unremarkable appearance hitting targets at impossible distances. Some things never change. Months pass. Wells settles into his role with NCIS, developing protocols for identifying potential special operators in civilian encounters. His experience with Commander Hayes becomes a training scenario for police departments along the coast. Then one stormy evening, as he works late in his office, a knock comes at his door. Standing there, once again in civilian clothes with that deliberately unremarkable appearance, is Commander Hayes. Detective, she acknowledges with a nod. It's Agent now, he corrects, gesturing for her to enter. I didn't expect to see you again. Plans change, she says, taking a seat. I understand you've implemented new protocols for identifying operators in the field. Based on our encounter, yes. It's helping prevent similar situations. She studies him for a moment. Your work has been noticed, which is why I'm here. We need someone with your perspective for an upcoming operation. Wells leans forward, intrigued. What kind of operation? The kind that requires someone who understands both sides, law enforcement and military. Someone who can navigate the gray areas when they overlap. Is this official? Very, she says, sliding a folder across his desk. Admiral Wilson recommended you personally. As Wells reviews the documents, he begins to understand the scope of what she's proposing: a joint task force targeting domestic threats with international connections, operating in the shadows between military jurisdiction and civilian law enforcement. Why me? He asks finally. Commander Hayes studies him with those same calculating eyes he remembers from their first encounter. Because when you arrested me, you knew something wasn't right, but you followed procedure anyway. You put duty above instinct. That's exactly what we need. Wells considers the opportunity before him. 6 months ago, he was a small-town detective. Now he's being invited into a world few civilians ever see. When do we start? He asks. Commander Hayes stands. We already have. Meet me tomorrow at 600, same shooting range where we first met. And Wells? Yes? This time, leave the handcuffs at home. As she departs, Wells reflects on the strange path that led him here. From arresting a mysterious woman at a shooting range to joining her in defense of national security, life certainly takes unexpected turns. He glances down at the classified folder on his desk, emblazoned with the operation name, Silent Harbor 2. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one where the lines between law enforcement and military operations blur, where success means that nothing happens, and the greatest victories are the ones the public never hears about. Frank arrives at the shooting range an hour before dawn, his usual routine for the past 15 years. He's surprised to find the lights already on inside the main building. Hello, he calls, hand instinctively moving toward the small revolver he keeps for emergencies. Just me, Frank, comes a familiar voice. Commander Hayes sits at his desk, reviewing what appear to be satellite images. Didn't expect to see you back so soon, he says, relaxing. It's been, what, 8 months? 9, she corrects, closing the folder. And this isn't exactly a social call. Frank nods, understanding. Agent Wells called yesterday, said I should prepare for some visitors. He's a quick study, she replies. We need your range for the next 72 hours. Exclusive use. Frank raises an eyebrow. That's a big ask during hunting season. I know. That's why this came with the request. She slides an envelope across the desk. Frank glances inside, sees a check with enough zeros to cover 6 months of operating costs. That'll do it, but you know I would have said yes anyway. We do things properly, she says, even when no one's watching, especially then. Over the next few hours, vehicles begin arriving. Unmarked SUVs, a communications van disguised as a cable company truck, and a dozen men and women who, like Commander Hayes, have perfected the art of being forgettable. By noon, the shooting range has transformed into a tactical operations center. Maps cover the walls, communications equipment fills Frank's office, and the firing lanes have been converted to staging areas. Wells arrives last, bringing equipment from the NCIS field office. "Frank," he greets with a handshake. "Thanks for the accommodation." "Couldn't say no when my country calls," Frank replies. "Besides, Commander Hayes has a way of being persuasive without saying much at all." Wells smiles. "That she does." Commander Hayes gathers everyone for a briefing. "For those who haven't been briefed, we've identified a potential security threat operating within 50 miles of this location. Intelligence suggests they're planning something significant within the next 48 hours. She gestures to the maps. "We have 3 possible locations for their operations center. We need to identify the correct one without alerting them to our presence." Wells studies the maps. "These are all civilian areas, 2 residential neighborhoods and a commercial district. We can't just raid them." "Exactly," Commander Hayes confirms. "Which is why we needed someone with your background, Wells. We need to maintain the firewall between military operations and domestic law enforcement." The operation unfolds methodically over the next day. Teams conduct surveillance, electronic intelligence gathering, and careful observation of the targets. Wells coordinates with local authorities, establishing cover stories and contingency plans without revealing the true nature of the operation. Frank watches from the sidelines, impressed by the precision. These people move differently from ordinary soldiers or police officers, more efficient, more controlled, communicating with minimal words and subtle gestures. Late that night, a breakthrough comes. A team monitoring electronic communications picks up coded transmissions from one of the target locations in an abandoned waterfront warehouse that, on paper, belongs to a shell company. "We've got movement," reports one of the analysts. "Thermal imaging shows at least 8 individuals inside, plus what appears to be weapons cache." Commander Hayes studies the feed. "Wells, this is where it gets complicated. We have probable cause, but this needs to transition to a law enforcement operation." Wells nods. "I'll contact the tactical response team, but they'll need a briefing." "Give them the minimum," she instructs. "Foreign-trained operatives planning domestic attack. Nothing about our unit or mission parameters." As Wells coordinates with local authorities, Commander Hayes pulls Frank aside. "We need one more thing from you." "Name it," he says. "When this is over, certain details will need to be forgotten. The equipment here, some of the personnel you've met, the exact nature of the operation." Frank smiles slightly. "Commander, I spent 20 years keeping secrets for the Navy. Some habits don't break." She studies him for a moment, then nods. "That's why we came here first. Wells said you were reliable." The raid happens just before dawn. Local tactical teams move in with federal agents, while Commander Hayes and her team maintain overwatch positions, ready to intervene if the situation escalates beyond local capabilities. It doesn't. The operation goes smoothly. 8 arrests, a significant weapon seizure, and intelligence materials that will keep analysts busy for months. The official story released to the press mentions only a successful joint operation between federal and local authorities based on anonymous intelligence. By noon, most of Commander Hayes' team has disappeared, equipment packed into unmarked vehicles, leaving no trace of their presence. Frank methodically returns the range to its normal configuration. Wells finds him replacing target stands. "Thank you," he says simply. "For what?" "According to the news, I had nothing to do with anything," Frank replies. Wells smiles. "Exactly." As the last vehicles prepare to depart, Commander Hayes approaches Frank one final time. This range seems to be a nexus point for interesting activities. "Just a place where people practice their skills," Frank says. "Some more specialized than others." She hands him a business card with only a phone number. "If you notice anyone else with unusual talents, this number reaches people who might be interested." "Recruiting?" Frank asks. "Always," she confirms. "The right people are hard to find, and even harder to recognize," he adds. She nods in acknowledgement. "Take care, Frank." As she walks away, Frank calls after her. Commander, was any of this real? The arrest? The courtroom? Or was it all part of the operation? She turns back. What do you think? Frank considers this. I think sometimes the most effective way to hide is in plain sight. Create a spectacle that people remember, but for reasons that distract from the truth. For the first time, Commander Hayes gives him a genuine smile. You would have made an excellent operative yourself, Frank. I'm happy keeping the range running, he says. Someone needs to be here when people like you need a quiet place to practice. 6 months later, Frank notices a young woman at the range, early 20s, handling her rifle with unusual expertise. Nothing flashy, but her technique speaks of professional training. When she adjusts for a difficult crosswind shot without checking any instruments, Frank remembers Commander Hayes doing the same thing. He watches for an hour as she systematically works through different distances, recording her results in a small notebook. When she finishes, he approaches. That's some impressive shooting. She nods politely. Thank you. I practice when I can. Military background? He asks casually. College shooting team. She replies, a perfect cover story. Plausible and difficult to verify. Frank nods, playing along. Well, you're welcome here anytime. We get all skill levels. As she packs her equipment, he notices a familiar movement pattern, the same efficient motions he's seen from Commander Hayes and her team. That evening, after closing, Frank stares at the business card Commander Hayes gave him. The young woman had been good, very good at maintaining her cover. But, to his trained eye, certain things can't be hidden. He dials the number. Identification, answers a neutral voice. Blue water, still horizon, Frank says, recalling the authentication phrase Wells had taught him. Go ahead. I met someone interesting today, Frank says. The kind of person you might want to know about. Details? Female, early 20s. Expert marksmanship with unusual training indicators. Giving cover story about college teams, but showing operational movement patterns. A pause. Assessment? Either she's one of yours testing me, or she's someone who should be on your radar. We'll look into it. Anything else? Frank hesitates. Is Commander Hayes still active in this area? Another pause, longer this time. That name isn't in our current operational database. Frank understands. Of course, just curious. Your contribution is noted and appreciated. 3 days later, the young woman returns to the range. This time, a man accompanies her middle-aged, with the bearing of someone comfortable with authority. They practice together, their interactions suggesting a mentor-student relationship. When they finish, the man approaches Frank while the woman packs their equipment. Mr. Sullivan, he says, using Frank's last name, though Frank hasn't introduced himself. I understand you made a call recently. Frank remains calm. I did. Good eyes, the man says. She's one of our assessment candidates. Part of her evaluation was to shoot here without drawing attention. She's skilled, Frank acknowledges. But there are tells if you know what to look for. That's why we value observers like you, the man replies. Sometimes talent spots talent better than our formal systems. The young woman joins them. How did I do? She asks, dropping the pretense. Mr. Sullivan identified you within an hour, the man tells her. You'll need to work on concealing your training patterns. She accepts the criticism professionally. What gave me away? Wind adjustment without instruments, Frank says. Commander Hayes did the same thing. The man and woman exchange a glance at the mention of Hayes's name. Thank you for the feedback, she says. May I come back to practice? Frank nods. Anytime. Though you might want to deliberately miss occasionally if you're trying to blend in. As they prepare to leave, the man hands Frank an envelope. Our appreciation for your discretion and assistance. Inside is a new business card, this one with an embossed insignia Frank recognizes from Naval Special Warfare, and a different phone number. We're always looking for training facilities and observers, the man explains. If you're interested in a more formal arrangement. Frank considers it. After 15 years running the range, perhaps it's time for a new challenge. I might be. Commander Hayes spoke highly of your situational awareness, the man adds. That carries weight in our organization. As Frank watches them leave, He reflects on the strange path his retirement has taken from running a simple shooting range to becoming part of an invisible network that identifies and nurtures the nation's most specialized defenders. He tucks the new card into his wallet, next to the first one. Some people serve in uniform for all to see, others serve in shadows. And some, like him, simply keep watch, making sure those shadows remain safe places for necessary work. The next morning, Frank arrives at the range to find a package waiting: a new high-end spotting scope with thermal capabilities and an encrypted communication module. The note attached contains only 3 words: "Keep watching, Frank." He recognizes the handwriting immediately. Commander Hayes may have moved on to new operations, new identities, new missions. But her legacy continues here, in this small corner of Maine, where ordinary-looking people with extraordinary skills can practice their craft away from curious eyes. Frank installs the new equipment, understanding its true purpose. He's not just running a shooting range anymore. He's maintaining a waypoint in a hidden network, a place where those who operate in darkness can find momentary safety in the light. And if more young shooters with too perfect technique and too casual cover stories appear, he'll know exactly what to do, because some of them are always around. You just don't see them unless you know how to look.